The fog hung low over Coastal Harbor, Maine, a small town where the sea whispered secrets and the dawn broke with a quiet promise. In a modest house by the harbor, a woman named Alexandra Hayes stared at her reflection in a cracked bathroom mirror. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, hid a story no one could read. She wasn't just another local. She was a ghost, a Navy commander trained to vanish in plain sight. 12 years of covert missions had carved her into someone who could walk through a crowd unnoticed, yet her heart carried the weight of sacrifices no one would ever know. Today, she'd head to a shooting range, not for practice, but to blend into a cover that kept her mission alive. The thought of her late brother, a Marine lost in a classified op, tightened her chest. She touched the small scar on her wrist, a reminder of the rope burns from training, and whispered, "For you." This was her hook, her reason to keep going, and it pulled her forward into another day of shadows. At the remote shooting range, the air smelled of salt and pine. Frank Holden, a retired Navy man with 22 years under his belt, sipped his coffee in the safety booth. His eyes, weathered but keen, scanned the early arrivals. Hunters, weekend warriors, and the occasional cop frequented the range, but today, something fell off. Alexandra arrived, unremarkable in faded jeans, a gray jacket, and a baseball cap pulled low. She carried a long case, her movements quiet but deliberate. Frank watched as she set up at the farthest lane, assembling a rifle with a precision that made his gut stir. She wasn't here to show off. She was here to disappear. Her first shots hit dead center, the kind of accuracy that raised eyebrows. Frank leaned forward, his coffee forgotten. She switched to targets at 300 yards, then 500, without adjusting her scope. Each shot landed perfectly, her breathing steady. 4 counts in, hold, exhale, fire. He noticed her glance at the wind, not with tools, but with instinct, adjusting for shifts no one else caught. A nervous patron, a burly man in a hunting vest, approached Frank. That woman at the end, she's hitting impossible shots. No badge, no ID tag. Something's not right. Frank nodded, his years in the Navy whispering caution. He didn't act yet, but his hand hovered near the phone. 20 minutes later, 2 local police officers arrived, their boots heavy on the gravel. The senior officer, Officer Daniels, approached Alexandra cautiously. "Ma'am, we need to see some ID and your permit for that weapon." She turned, hands visible, her face calm. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady. "ID and permit, please," Daniels repeated. She met his gaze. "I don't have those with me." The officers exchanged a glance. A quick search found no wallet, no phone, just a key card with no marks and a notebook filled with coordinates. "You're coming with us," Daniels said, cuffing her wrists. She didn't resist, her silence unnerving them more than defiance would have. As they led her to the cruiser, Frank caught her eyes scanning the tree line, the road, the distant mountains, like she was calculating something far beyond the moment. At the Coastal Harbor Sheriff's Office, the booking area buzzed with quiet tension. The station was small, with 3 holding cells and a handful of desks. Alexandra sat in a metal chair, her hands still cuffed, as the booking officer, a young deputy named Carter, tried to process her. "Name?" he asked. Silence. "Address?" Nothing. Her calm gaze met his, unflinching. "You know refusing to identify is a crime, right?" She didn't respond, her eyes steady but distant. Detective Marcus Wells, a seasoned investigator with a knack for reading people, took over. He tried everything: friendly small talk, veiled threats about federal charges, promises of leniency. She answered with respectful silence, her posture never wavering. Carter brought her a cup of water. As she reached for it, her sleeve slipped, revealing a scar on her wrist, jagged, like from a rope burn. "Interesting scar," Carter said, curious. "Rock climbing accident," she replied, her first words in hours, her voice low but clear. Wells, watching from across the room, frowned. Something about her didn't add up. She wasn't a criminal, wasn't scared, just patient, like she knew something no one else did. The public defender, a tired man named Jenkins, arrived later, frustrated by her silence. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he snapped. "They're talking terrorism now. That rifle's not registered anywhere." She didn't react, her eyes fixed on the window, studying the harbor where a naval ship loomed in the fog. As they prepared her for arraignment, Wells noticed her calm deepen, almost like she was waiting for something. In the cell, she moved with purpose, noting camera angles, blind spots, and guard rotations. Her eyes traced the building's layout, exits, locks, patterns. Wells whispered to the sheriff. Prints came back empty. Nothing local or state. "Federal's down till tomorrow." The sheriff rubbed his jaw. "Try again, then. She's no ordinary drifter." The air grew heavy with questions no one could answer. Who was she? Why was she so calm? And what was she hiding? The Coastal Harbor Courthouse, built in 1887, stood like a relic with its creaky wooden benches and ornate railings. The next morning, the room buzzed with locals, reporters from Portland, and a few men in dark suits who blended into the corners. Alexandra Hayes sat at the defendant's table, her orange jumpsuit stark against her calm posture. Her public defender, Jenkins, looked frazzled, his tie loose. "Your Honor," he said to Judge Eleanor Harmon, "I need more time. My client won't talk, and I can't prepare." The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, frowned at the docket. Before she could reply, a man in a suit stood. "Your Honor, I'm Special Agent Thomas, Homeland Security. We request immediate transfer of the defendant to federal custody. Possible national security threat." Another man jumped up. "The FBI has jurisdiction here. This ties to our investigation." The judge slammed her gavel. "Enough. This is my courtroom. We'll do the arraignment first." The clerk read the charges: unregistered firearm, refusal to identify, suspected terrorism. Alexandra sat still, her face unreadable, eyes fixed forward. Detective Wells, in the front row, studied her. She didn't fit any profile. Too calm for a criminal, too steady for a fanatic. "What does the defendant plead?" Judge Harmon asked. Jenkins opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the heavy oak doors swung open. A Navy admiral in full dress uniform, medals gleaming, strode down the aisle. Two officers followed, their steps crisp. The room froze. Veterans in the crowd stood at attention, their spines straight. Even the judge sat taller. The admiral handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff, who passed it to Harmon. She broke the seal, read the papers, and her face paled. "In light of this," she said, her voice tight, "all charges are dismissed. This case is now classified as a matter of national security." She banged her gavel. Court adjourned. The room erupted in whispers. The admiral approached Alexandra as the bailiff uncuffed her. She stood, her voice low but firm. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience." The admiral's words cut through the noise. "No, Commander. The Navy apologizes to you." At Commander, veterans and military personnel snapped to attention. Wells' jaw dropped. "Commander?" Her demeanor shifted, shoulders squared, presence commanding. She wasn't hiding anymore. Judge Harmon, a former JAG officer, stood and nodded to the Admiral and Alexandra. "Thank you for your understanding, Your Honor," the Admiral said. "Commander Hayes has been under classified orders. Discretion was required." Outside, reporters swarmed as Alexandra, now in civilian clothes, stood by a black SUV with the Admiral. Sheriff Daniels approached, his face torn between confusion and respect. "Admiral, my department needs answers. We treated her like a terrorist." The Admiral's tone was firm. "Sheriff, Commander Hayes is one of our best special operators. Her assignment is classified, but she's no threat, quite the opposite." Wells stepped forward, guilt in his eyes. "Commander, I'm sorry." She met his gaze, no trace of resentment. "No apology needed, Detective. You did your job." An elderly man in a VFW cap shuffled over. "Ma'am, I was a Marine in Desert Storm. I knew you were special in there. Thank you for your service." She shook his hand. "Thank you for yours." The Admiral checked his watch. "Commander Hayes, we need to debrief for Operation Silent Harbor in Washington." Daniels froze. Silent Harbor? The port attack last year. The Admiral stayed vague. "Her service is exemplary, much of it unknown to the public." A reporter pushed in. "Commander, a statement?" No comment. she said, her tone final. I like privacy. As she moved to the SUV, officers formed an impromptu honor corridor, some saluting. Wells watched, realizing she hadn't been hiding guilt, she'd been hiding excellence. Her cover demanded it, and she'd played it perfectly. At the shooting range, Frank locked up for the day, the sunset painting the sky red. A government vehicle pulled up, and Alexandra stepped out. Her movements are different now, fluid, confident, no need to blend in. I'm here for my equipment, she said. Frank nodded. Sheriff sent it back. Special courier. He handed her a secured case. As she checked it, he cleared his throat. 20 years Navy myself. Submarines. I knew you were something. She smiled faintly. Most see what they expect. She assembled her rifle, took aim at a distant target, and fired. A perfect shot, no scope. Frank's binoculars confirmed it. That rifle's not standard issue, he said. No, she agreed, packing it away. You could have stopped the cops, he added. Wasn't my place, he replied. But I called a Navy buddy at the Pentagon after they took you. She nodded. Thank you. Will you come back? Frank asked as she headed to her vehicle. She glanced at the harbor, where naval ships moved unseen. Some of us are always around, she said. You just don't see us. Frank saluted as her taillights faded, knowing he'd been part of something bigger. The range felt quieter, but the weight of her presence lingered. 2 weeks passed, and Detective Wells sat at his desk in the Coastal Harbor Sheriff's office, the hum of fluorescent lights above him. Case files were piled high, but his mind kept drifting to Alexandra Hayes. Her calm in the cell, her precision at the range, the Admiral's words, it all stuck with him. He'd arrested her, thinking she was a threat, only to learn she was a hero. His phone rang, snapping him out of it. Detective Wells, he answered, straightening up. This is Admiral Wilson, the voice said, steady and commanding. We met during the incident with Commander Hayes. Wells' pulse quickened. Yes, sir. How can I help? The Admiral's tone softened. We're holding a commendation for Commander Hayes tomorrow at Naval Station Norfolk. She thought you might want to attend. It's classified, but we'll arrange clearance. Wells blinked, surprised. I'd be honored, sir. But why me? I arrested her. The Admiral chuckled. Sometimes those who challenge us teach us the most. Be there at 0800. The next morning, Wells drove to Norfolk, his old pickup rattling along the highway. Security checkpoints slowed him down, each guard scrutinizing his ID with cold efficiency. Inside a small auditorium, fewer than 50 people sat, high-ranking officers and others in civilian clothes who moved like soldiers. Wells took a back-row seat, feeling out of place in his worn jacket. The ceremony started quietly, no cameras, no press. Admiral Wilson stepped to the podium. Today, we honor Commander Alexandra Hayes for her role in Operation Silent Harbor. Wells leaned forward, his heart heavy with curiosity. The Admiral continued. She spent 11 months undercover, neutralizing a threat to our nation's ports. Her actions saved countless lives. Alexandra walked forward, her Navy uniform crisp, ribbons bright on her chest. She looked nothing like the quiet woman in the orange jumpsuit. The Admiral's voice carried pride. Commander Hayes, first in her class at Coronado, became one of the few women in the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. That classified, but her skill isn't. Wells' eyes widened. She'd taken down 16 threats while keeping her cover, even when it meant letting him arrest her. The Admiral pinned a medal on her, his voice low. When your position was at risk, you held steady, even in detention. Alexandra nodded slightly, her eyes catching Wells for a moment, no blame in them. After the ceremony, Wells approached her, his steps hesitant. Commander, congratulations, he said, offering his hand. Thank you for coming, Detective, she replied, her grip firm, her voice warm. I'm sorry again for what happened. She shook her head. You did your job. Your thoroughness stood out. Most would have let it slide. Wells shifted, uneasy. Why let us arrest you? You could have shown ID quietly. She glanced around, then led him to a corner. The operation wasn't done. My cover had to hold, even under scrutiny. If I'd gotten special treatment, 11 months of work would have collapsed. The targets had eyes in local government. Wells nodded, understanding dawning. She'd chosen handcuffs to protect lives. Another officer called her away, and Admiral Wilson appeared beside Wells. "Impressive woman, isn't she?" he said, his eyes following Alexandra. "Yes, sir," Wells replied. "I've never met anyone like her." The Admiral smiled. "Few have." Your attention to detail caught her eye. "Ever think about a career change? Call my office." Wells drove back to Maine, the Admiral's words echoing. He'd spent 13 years as a small-town cop, but now something stirred, a chance to work in the shadows, supporting people like Alexandra. By the time he reached Coastal Harbor, he'd made up his mind. Months later, Wells stood on a naval vessel's deck, the Maine coast fading into the mist. He joined the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, a new role as liaison between local police and special operations. His phone buzzed with a text from an unlisted number. "Some of us are always around. Welcome aboard." He smiled, recognizing Alexandra's words from the range. The captain approached. "Agent Wells, we've got reports of odd activity at a private shooting range near an export. Want to take point?" Wells nodded, a spark in his chest. "Yes, sir. I'll look into it." The report mentioned a woman hitting impossible shots, her appearance plain, but her skill unmistakable. He chuckled. Something's never changed. Back at the sheriff's office, Wells worked late, drafting protocols to spot operators like Alexandra in civilian settings. Her case became a training scenario for coastal police departments. One stormy evening, a knock came at his door. Alexandra stood there, back in faded jeans and a cap. Her unremarkable look deliberate. "Detective," she said with a nod. "It's Agent now," he corrected, gesturing her inside. "Didn't expect you again." She sat, her eyes scanning the room like always. "Plans change. Your protocols are working. They've noticed you." She slid a folder across his desk. "We need someone like you for an operation. Admiral Wilson recommended you." Wells opened the folder, his heart racing. A joint task force, military and law enforcement, targeting domestic threats. "Why me?" he asked. Her eyes held his. "You've arrested me, but follow the rules. Duty over instinct. That's what we need." Wells leaned back in his chair, the folder still open on his desk. Alexandra's words hung in the air, heavy with purpose. "When do we start?" he asked, his voice steady despite the nerves twisting in his gut. She stood, her movements sharp but calm. "Tomorrow, 0600, at the shooting range where we met." And Wells, "Leave the handcuffs at home." A faint smile crossed her face, the first he'd seen that wasn't guarded. He nodded, a mix of excitement and uncertainty stirring inside him. As she left, the storm outside rattled the windows, mirroring the shift in his life. 6 months ago, he was just a small-town detective. Now, he was stepping into a world of secrets, where heroes like Alexandra operated unseen. He glanced at the folder again. Operation Silent Harbor 2. The name alone sent a chill through him. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to learn. The next morning, Frank arrived at the Coastal Harbor shooting range before dawn, his boots crunching on the gravel. He'd run the place for 15 years, a quiet retirement after his Navy days, but lately, it felt like more than just a range. He flipped on the lights, expecting the usual stillness, but froze. Alexandra sat at his desk, studying satellite images, her cap pulled low. "Didn't expect you back so soon," he said, his hand easing off the revolver at his hip. 9 months, she corrected, closing the folder. "Not a social call." Frank nodded, sensing the weight of her presence. Agent Wells called, said to expect visitors. She looked up, her eyes sharp. "He's a quick study. We need your range for 72 hours. Exclusive use." Frank raised an eyebrow. Big ask during hunting season. She slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was a check, enough to cover 6 months of costs. "That'll do it," he said, but added, "I'd have said yes anyway." By noon, the range transformed. Unmarked SUVs and a communications van, disguised as a cable truck, filled the lot. A dozen men and women arrived, each as unremarkable as Alexandra, but moving with the same quiet precision. Maps covered the walls, and the firing lanes became staging areas. Wells arrived last, carrying NCIS equipment, his new badge still unfamiliar on his belt. "Frank," He greeted, shaking his hand. Thanks for this. Frank shrugged. Country calls, I answer. Besides, Commander Hayes has a way of convincing without saying much. Wells grinned. She does. Alexandra gathered everyone for a briefing, her voice cutting through the hum of radios. We've identified a threat within 50 miles. Intelligence says they're planning something big in the next 48 hours. She pointed to 3 map locations, 2 neighborhoods, 1 commercial district. We need to pinpoint their base without tipping them off. Wells studied the maps, his cop instincts kicking in. These are civilian areas. We can't just storm in. Alexandra nodded. Exactly. We need your perspective to keep this clean, Wells. Military stays separate from law enforcement. The team split into groups, some setting up surveillance, others monitoring electronic signals. Frank watched from the sidelines, impressed by their efficiency. They communicated with quick glances and short words, like a language only they understood. He caught Alexandra's eye once, and she gave a small nod, acknowledging his role in this strange dance. Wells worked tirelessly, coordinating with local police without revealing the operation scope. He crafted cover stories, a gas leak here, a traffic stop there, to keep civilians clear. Late that night, an analyst called out, "We've got something." Thermal imaging showed 8 people in an abandoned waterfront warehouse, plus weapons and equipment. Alexandra studied the feed, her face unreadable. Wells, this is where it gets tricky. We've got probable cause, but this needs to shift to law enforcement. Wells nodded, already dialing the local tactical team. I'll brief them, but only the basics, foreign operatives, domestic threat, nothing about your unit. She agreed, her trust in him clear. As Wells made calls, Alexandra pulled Frank aside. One more thing, she said. When this is over, forget the details, the equipment, the people, the mission. Frank smiled. Commander, I kept secrets for the Navy 20 years. I know how this works. She studied him, then nodded. Wells said you were reliable. That's why we're here. The raid was set for dawn. Wells worked through the night, his heart pounding as he bridged the gap between military precision and police protocol. Alexandra's team took overwatch positions, ready to step in if things went south. Frank stayed at the range, watching monitors, his old Navy instincts alive again. He wondered about Alexandra. What drove her to live this life, always hiding, always risking? He thought of his own years at sea, the quiet pride of serving without fanfare. As the first light broke, he whispered to himself, some people carry the weight so others don't have to. The range felt alive, a hub for something bigger than he'd ever imagined. The raid went off like clockwork just before dawn. Local tactical teams, briefed by Wells, swept into the waterfront warehouse with federal agents trailing close. Alexandra's unit watched from hidden positions, their rifles ready but silent. 8 suspects were cuffed, a stash of weapons and encrypted files seized. The news later called it a joint operation based on anonymous tips. No mention of the Navy or Alexandra's team. By noon, the range was back to normal, the SUVs and comms van gone, maps stripped from the walls. Frank stood in the empty firing lanes, the silence heavy. He found Alexandra packing the last of her gear. This place sees more action than I expected, he said, half joking. She handed him a business card with just a phone number. If you spot anyone too good to be normal, call this. We're always looking. Frank raised an eyebrow. Recruiting. She nodded. The right people are hard to find. As she drove off, Frank turned the card over in his hand, noticing a faint watermark, a naval special warfare insignia. He tucked it away, but a question lingered. Was any of it real? He called after her. The arrest, the courtroom drama, was it all part of the plan? She paused, her eyes glinting. What do you think? Frank grinned. I think you hid the truth in plain sight. Made a show to distract from the real mission. Her smile was real this time. You'd have been a good operative, Frank. He shook his head. I'm happy here, keeping this place ready for people like you. She nodded and left, the harbor mist swallowing her taillights. 6 months later, Frank opened a range at dawn. The routine familiar, but never dull. A young woman, early 20s, arrived alone, her rifle case slung over her shoulder. She was plain, jeans, hoodie, no flash, but her movements screamed training. She set up at the farthest lane, her shots hitting targets at distances that made Frank's old Navy instincts tingle. She adjusted for wind without tools, just like Alexandra. He watched her for an hour, noting the way she recorded her shots in a small notebook. When she finished, he approached. "Nice shooting," he said. "Thanks," she replied, her voice polite but guarded. "Military?" he asked casually. "College shooting team," she said, her answer too smooth, like a rehearsed line. Frank nodded, not buying it. That night, he stared at the card Alexandra gave him. The young woman's cover was good, but not perfect. Her movements, her precision, they matched Alexandra's too closely. He dialed the number. "Blue water, still horizon," he said, using the code Wells had shared. "Go ahead," a neutral voice answered. "Saw someone interesting today," Frank said. "Female, early 20s, expert shooter, claims college team, but moves like an operator." A pause. "She's either one of yours or someone you should know about." The voice was calm. "Noted. Anything else?" Frank hesitated. "Is Commander Hayes still around?" Another pause. Longer. "That name's not in our current database." Frank understood. Either she'd moved on, or they wouldn't say. 3 days later, the young woman returned, but this time a man was with her. Middle-aged, confident, with the bearing of a leader. They shot together, their dynamic like mentor and student. When they finished, the man approached Frank. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, using Frank's last name without introduction. "You made a call recently." Frank stayed cool. "I did." The man nodded. "Good eyes. She's an assessment candidate. Part of her test was to shoot here without standing out." Frank glanced at the woman. "She's skilled, but there's tells if you know what to look for." The woman joined them, dropping her cover. "How'd I do?" she asked. "He spotted you in an hour," the man said. "Work on hiding your training." She nodded, taking it in stride. "What gave me away?" she asked Frank. "Wind adjustment, no tools," he said. Commander Hayes did the same. The man's eyes flickered at Alexandra's name, a hint of surprise. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," he said, handing Frank an envelope. Inside was another card, this one with the Naval Special Warfare insignia embossed. "We need training sites and sharp eyes like yours. Interested in something formal?" Frank thought it over. After years of quiet retirement, the pull of something bigger was strong. "I might be," he said. "Commander Hayes spoke highly of you," the man added. "That means something." As they left, Frank watched the woman's careful steps, wondering if she'd follow Alexandra's path into the shadows. Later, a package arrived at the range, a high-end spotting scope with thermal imaging and an encrypted comms module. A note inside read, "Keep watching, Frank." The handwriting was Alexandra's. He smiled, setting up the scope. His range wasn't just a range anymore. It was a waypoint for those who served unseen. He thought of Alexandra, out there under a new name, a new mission. Her legacy lingered, a reminder that some heroes worked in silence, their victories unknown but vital. Frank stood in the quiet of the shooting range, the new spotting scope gleaming under the morning light. The note from Alexandra, Commander Hayes, sat heavy in his pocket. He wasn't just a retired Navy man anymore. He was part of something bigger, a silent network watching for those who moved in shadows. The range felt alive, its lanes holding secrets beyond the hunters and weekend shooters. He thought of Alexandra, her calm in the courtroom, her impossible shots, and the way she trusted him to keep quiet. That trust changed him. He wasn't just keeping the range running. He was guarding a space where heroes like her could sharpen their skills unnoticed. A week later, a new shooter arrived, a man in his 30s, quiet but sharp-eyed. He carried a rifle case and set up without a word, his shots precise, almost too perfect. Frank watched, his instincts buzzing. The man's movements were controlled, his breathing steady, like Alexandra's. He didn't use a scope for long-range shots, just adjusted for wind with a glance. Frank approached as the man packed up. "Good shooting," he said. The man nodded, his smile tight. "Thanks. Just practice." Frank didn't push, but he noticed a faint scar on the man's hand, like Alexandra's rope burn. "Military?" Frank asked. "Private contractor, the man replied, his answer quick like a door shutting. Frank let it go, but his gut told him there was more. That evening, Frank dialed the number on Alexandra's card. "Blue water, still horizon," he said. The voice on the other end was crisp. "Go ahead." Frank described the man, his skill, the scar, the vague cover story. "He's either one of yours or someone to watch," Frank said. A pause. "We'll check." "Good work." Frank hung up, staring at the harbor. He wondered if Alexandra was out there, maybe watching the same water under a new name. Her world was one of constant cover, where every move hid a purpose. He felt a pang of respect, mixed with sadness. What was it like to live without roots, to be a ghost for your country? Days later, Wells visited the range, his NCIS badge now worn with ease. "Frank, you're turning this place into a talent scout hub," he said, half laughing. Frank shrugged. "Just doing what I'm told." Wells leaned against the counter, his eyes serious. "That operation we ran here, it saved lives. You helped make that happen." Frank waved it off. "I just opened the doors." Wells shook his head. "More than that. You saw what others missed. That's why Hayes trusts you." Frank felt a warmth at her name. "She's still out there?" he asked. Wells hesitated. "People like her don't stop. They just change faces." Frank nodded, understanding the unspoken truth. She was still serving, still unseen. As Wells left, Frank thought about the young woman and the man he'd spotted. Both carried the same quiet strength as Alexandra. He realized his role wasn't just about the range. It was about recognizing those who protected the world in secret. He'd spent 20 years in the Navy, but this felt different, personal. He was no longer just a bystander. He was a keeper of their shadows, ensuring they had a place to be themselves, even for a moment. The moral hit him hard. True heroes don't seek applause. They work in silence, and it's the quiet watchers, like him, who help them carry on.
The Maine winter crept in, and the shooting range grew quiet, the cold keeping most shooters away. Frank stood in his booth. The thermal scope Alexandra left him catching the faint glow of distant targets. Her note, "Keep watching, Frank," felt like a command, a call to stay vigilant. He'd changed since her arrest, no longer just a retired sailor running a range. He was a gatekeeper, spotting those who served in silence, like Alexandra. Her world of covert missions and hidden sacrifices had reshaped his own, giving his quiet life a new purpose. Every creak of the range's wooden beams reminded him of the courtroom, the Admiral's arrival, and her calm strength. He wondered where she was now, under what name, saving lives no one would ever know about. One snowy morning, a young man arrived, barely 20, his face boyish but his eyes old. He carried a rifle case, worn but meticulously cared for. Frank watched as he set up, his shots hitting targets at impossible ranges, his form flawless. He didn't check the wind, just adjusted instinctively, like Alexandra. When he finished, he lingered, staring at the harbor. Frank approached, his breath fogging in the air. "Good shooting," he said. The kid nodded, shy. "Thanks. Learn from the best." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Military." The kid hesitated, then said, "My sister. She taught me." His voice cracked, and Frank saw pain in his eyes, the kind that carried loss. Frank didn't push, but he noticed a small pendant around the kid's neck, an anchor, like Alexandra's tattoo. That night, he called the number. "Blue water, still horizon," he said. The voice answered, "Go ahead." Frank described the kid, his skill, the pendant, the mention of a sister. "He's young, but trained like one of yours," Frank said. A long pause. "We'll look into him. Good work." Frank leaned back, the phone heavy in his hand. He thought of Alexandra, her brother lost in a mission, her scar from training. Was this kid tied to her? He'd never know, but he felt her shadow in every detail. A week later, Wells stopped by, snow dusting his NCIS jacket. "Frank, you're a legend now," he said, grinning. "That kid you called about? He's being fast-tracked for training. You're spotting what we miss." Frank shrugged, uneasy with the praise. "Just doing what Hayes asked." Wells' smile faded. "She'd be proud. Her work lives on, through you." Frank's throat tightened. "She ever check in?" Wells shook his head. "She's out there, saving the world one shadow at a time." You're helping her do it." Frank nodded, the weight of his role settling deeper. As spring returned, Frank found a package at the range, a new set of encrypted comms gear, no note, but he knew it was from Alexandra. He set it up, his hands steady with purpose. The range was his post now, a haven for those who served unseen. He thought of Alexandra's sacrifices, the kid's pain, Wells' new path. They were all connected, threads in a quiet web of duty. The moral burned clear. True heroes don't seek glory, they protect in silence, and it's the watchers, the ones who see beyond the ordinary, who keep their missions alive. Frank looked out at the harbor, the fog lifting. He'd keep watching, ready for the next shadow to step into the light. The range settled back into its usual rhythm, but Frank felt a shift inside himself. The coastal Maine fog rolled in, cloaking the targets in a gray haze, yet his mind was clear. He wasn't just a range manager anymore. He was a sentinel, watching for those who operated beyond the public's gaze. Alexandra's card stayed in his wallet, a quiet reminder of the trust she'd placed in him. Every morning, as he unlocked the gates, he scanned the horizon, half expecting her to appear. But she was a ghost, her missions hidden in places he'd never see. Still, her presence lingered in the way he now noticed details, the flick of a shooter's wrist, the too-perfect aim of a hobbyist. He wondered how many others like her had passed through, unnoticed until now. One chilly morning, a woman in her late 20s arrived, her demeanor plain but her eyes sharp. She carried a worn rifle case and set up at the farthest lane. Frank watched from his booth, his coffee growing cold. Her shots were flawless, hitting targets at 600 yards without a scope. She adjusted for wind with a glance, her movements smooth, like Alexandra's. When she finished, she jotted notes in a small book, her handwriting precise. Frank approached, keeping his tone casual. "Nice work out there," he said. She smiled faintly. "Thanks." Just keeping sharp. Her voice was steady, but her eyes flicked to the tree line, scanning like a soldier. "You shoot competitively?" he asked. "Something like that," she replied, packing up fast. Frank caught a glimpse of a tattoo on her wrist, a faint anchor, barely visible. That night, he called the number. "Blue water, still horizon," he said. The voice on the other end was calm. "Go ahead." Frank described the woman, her skill, the tattoo, her vague answers. "She's either one of yours or someone worth checking," he said. A pause. "Noted. We'll handle it." Frank hesitated, then asked, "Any word on Commander Hayes?" The voice was firm. "That name's not active. Keep observing." Frank hung up, staring at the card. He pictured Alexandra, maybe halfway across the world, blending into a crowd, her mission unknown. He felt a tug of admiration, mixed with loneliness. Her life was sacrifice, no family, no recognition, just duty. Days later, Wells dropped by, his NCIS jacket wrinkled from long hours. "You're like a magnet for these people, Frank," he said, grinning. Frank shrugged. "Just doing my part." Wells leaned in, his voice low. "Your calls are making waves. That last one? She's being vetted for a special unit. You've got an eye." Frank felt a spark of pride, but brushed it off. "Just noticing what's there." Wells nodded. "That's enough. Hayes saw it in you too." Frank's chest tightened at her name. "She ever reach out?" he asked. Wells' eyes softened. "She's out there, Frank. People like her don't retire. They just fade to the next job." Frank closed the range that evening, the sunset casting long shadows. He thought of Alexandra, Wells, and the shooters who came and went. Each one carried a piece of her legacy, a silent promise to protect without praise. He realized his role was bigger than he'd thought. He was a bridge, connecting the visible world to the invisible one. The morals sank deep. Heroes like Alexandra kept the world safe, but it was people like him, the quiet watchers, who gave them space to do it. He tucked the scope away, ready for the next visitor, knowing he was part of their unseen network now.